Welcome back YouTubers to my channel of an everyday life of an Aspie. If you're following me and you're new to my channel, I welcome you all. I'm Aspie. I'm all about creating mental health and awareness, sharing my life stories with Asperger's syndrome, OCD and the like, along the way with tips and advice for you guys if you're struggling with your personal health, mental health, as well as maybe it's just some, messages of hope to give you clarity and understanding where your life is at, wherever you are struggling, be it if it's, say, a personal struggle of a relationship that's broken down or some kind of communication breakdown in the family or whatever it may be. I'm hoping to be your girl as a mental advocate, support person rolled into one umbrella there. So as we brought to my attention, as I said, that I'm hoping to do some more of the Autism and series, even though this one's basically at this point of time going to be all about the DSM-5 manual versus the New Zealand Autism Spectrum Disorder Guidelines that has been brought out, which I'm going to share briefly about the statistics based on mental health and every other health in general. So, as always, as a disclaimer before I continue, this is basically, I'm no medical doctor, I'm just your normal everyday Joe vlog. So if you see anything out of the ordinary of the warning signs and symptoms that has been persisting in some of the normal everyday topics I've been sharing, seek professional help for yourself or that loved one, or seek an opinion for yourself and loved one, because I don't further condone self-harm. So, as I mentioned, right now, this one's all about the summary of the New Zealand Autism Spectrum Disorder Guidelines. So I'm going to try and sum it up as briefly as I can with some of the clinical terminology that may come into play. Hopefully that you'll know what I'm talking about when I abbreviate it down. So hopefully some of these has been easy to follow for you anyway in regards to these topics. Give me the like for thumbs up and support engagement, and just show your support by just maybe commenting below on one of my videos just to say hi Aspie, yes or no, and just give me maybe a lowdown of what you think I need to improve on. I know that many people are still struggling to this day, as I know at this point of time, in a way of a formality of how I speak, because obviously I speak fast and many people think it's either a Kiwi thing, or B, a mixture of both for me anyway, for the sake of my condition. My mind engages before the mouth, or the mouth engages before the brain here. So let's begin this. So you're wondering what this is and all that, right? So here we go. The purpose of this guideline was intended to provide guidance on the autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, as I've abbreviated down with some parts of my videos, and both children and adults alike here in New Zealand. The guideline is an evidence-based summary that covers the identification and diagnosis of autism spectrum disorders and ongoing assessment, and assesses the interventions and services for the individual with ASD. It seeks to provide the best evidence currently available to aid informed decision making to improve the health, educational and social outcomes for these individuals. The guideline is used by the use of primary care practitioners, educational professionals, policymakers, funders, parents, carers, specialists, and any others who provide for people with ASD. The summary of the New Zealand Autism Spectrum Disorder Guideline, presents the key recommendations from each section of these guidelines that I'm going to clearly address. The summary, however, will also provide a brief outline of the process followed to develop the guideline. The second edition of this guideline was incorporated in 2016 of the updates that was developed through the living guideline process. This will mean that all amendments to the guideline recommendations identified in the supplementary papers that has been provided are also incorporated into the second edition. The first edition, however, is for the first time in New Zealand, an ASD guideline will provide evidence-based information for health, disability and educational professionals and social service agencies that will, or who will eventually provide services for people with ASD, as well as their families and whānau. In addition of that, in the year of 1998, the government commissioned a review of the autism services, now known as the Curry Report, across key sectors. The review identified, however, gaps in services and made some recommendations to improve the quality in autism spectrum disorders that has related services. Key issues included a lack of coordinated services and government leadership difficulties, in which case it still is today. The government is still struggling with this, but they are starting to come up with some other solutions. In saying this, in September 2002, in response to the recommendations in this Curry report, the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education, in conjunction with the Paediatric Society of New Zealand, started work on scoping an ASD guideline. By 2002, in December, however, the ASD Guideline Steering Group was set up to help guide the work of the Guideline Project team. This group helped to ensure that the service users' perspectives were included in the guideline, promoted awareness of cultural and migrant issues, and helped build the credibility of the project within the community. The steering group included representation from adults with ASD, parents, families of people with ASD, the Paediatric Society of New Zealand, the Faculty of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry of the Royal Australian and New Zealand College of Psychiatrists, disability provider organisations, Needs Assessment Service Coordination, Child, Youth and Family, Pacific Advisors, School Principals, Early Intervention Services, the Ministry of Education, Special Education, and the Disability Services of Māori Health, Clinical Services and Mental Health Directorates within the Ministry of Health. The members of the steering group are listed in Appendix 2 of the guideline, however, just to give you a lowdown. An ASD cross-government officials group oversaw the development of the guideline and provided regular updates for their respective ministers, depending on whose role for who. So, the structure of the ASD guideline has been divided into 8 parts to clearly illustrate what is given, and I'll be giving you guys the link for you guys if you want to know more about these different parts of what I'm expressing right now to you. So, therefore, as we know, basically, for the first part, or most of us should know, but I'll clearly illustrate it now. Part 1 covers the identification and initial assessment of children, young people, and adults with ASD. Part 2 focuses on how to best provide support for people who share their lives with individuals who has ASD. It also outlines the personal health needs of the people with ASD. Part 3 covers educational principles and interventions for children and young people. Growing up with ASD and guidance for education sector, organisation and management. Part 4 covers the management of behavioural, emotional and mental health difficulties that can be experienced by people with ASD, and provides evidence-based guidance on how these difficulties can be prevented, minimised or eased. Part 5 focuses on the support needs of people with ASD within the community setting, covering various aspects from transitioning from secondary school into adulthood to dealing with the criminal justice system. Part 6 focuses on the professional learning and developmental needs or group for individuals or groups who come into contact with people with ASD, from awareness raising to highly specialised training. Part 7 and 8 covers the perspectives and experiences of Māori and Pacific people. These are the development, obviously, as the ASD guideline was written by 3 work streams with experienced Māori and Pacific researchers. The 3 work streams, each with a particular expertise, were set up to represent different aspects of ASD in the different contexts in which people with ASD live, learn, work and play. The Paediatric Society, however, of New Zealand led work stream 1 under contract to the Ministry of Health. It addressed assessment, diagnosis and pharmacotherapy in children. The Ministry of Education leads into the work stream 2 category, which addressed management in the education sector and professional learning and developmental issues for parents and professionals. And last but not least, in work stream 3, however, the Ministry of Health focused on the issues in older children and adults, including diagnosis and assessment and interventions, as well as support across the age spectrum. The stakeholder reference groups were set up to provide input to these work streams from a wide range of providers and agencies. The results from this process were merged to provide an integrated approach to management issues. A Māori advisory group set by the Ministries of Health and Education, plus a series of nationwide Hui provided Māori input. Pacific input was provided by a whānau in the subsequent work of a Pacific researcher. The guideline has separate multi and specific chapters on this management of ASD in a culturally appropriate manner. Different contributors to the ASD guideline followed separate methodologies. Workstream 1 adapted the United Kingdom National Autism Plan for Children 2003-11 to New Zealand's circumstances for the assessment and diagnosis of children in Part 1 of the guideline that are clearly addressed. Broad evidence-however-based principles, development of practice questions, identification and appraisal of evidence to answer the questions, development of evidence tables and greater recommendations based on the body of evidence guided the development of all other parts, which you can find, as said before, as I'll give you guys the link onto what I'm saying, that will share that part of the tables and whatnot and listed in the summary. Living guideline process, as I said, was established in 2009. This process was to ensure that the guideline is regularly updated and refined to reflect any new research findings and changing the user's needs. Updates within the living guideline process are required when the recommendations in the first edition, however, of the guideline were no longer considered valid in view of the new evidence that has been found. A small multidisciplinary team formed the Living Guideline Group, an advisory group responsible for identifying topics for updates, concentrating new evidence, and reporting on any implications for guideline recommendations. Basically, that's what the multidisciplinary team for the Living Guideline Group is all about. Every year since 2009, a topic within the guideline has been prioritised for update by the Living Guideline Group. A systematic review is undertaken involving the identification and critical appraisal of new research published since the year of 2004. The date that final literature searches were conducted for the guideline's first edition. An assessment of the quality, quantity, consistency, applicability, and clinical impact of all the studies that has been formed as the body evidence of the body structure of this guideline. This is considered by the LGG group, the Living Guideline Group, at a face-to-face meeting. The wording and evidence grading system of relevant current recommendations and good practice points in the guidelines are reviewed and revised. New recommendations and good practice points are also developed. A comprehensive supplementary paper describing the systematic review and the Living Guideline Group decisions is prepared for each updated topic. These are published annually on the Ministry of Health paid webpage, which again I'll link it to you. Revisions from the first 7 updates has been incorporated. Further future topic updates will continue to be made available electronically via the Ministry of Health website. Marita Broadstock Insight Research prepares the systematic reviews and supplementary papers and directs the Living Guideline process. The first 3 updates were undertaken under oversight of the New Zealand Guidelines Group. Right. The executive summary based on the recent overseas data, ASD is thought to affect more than 40,000 New Zealanders. It imposes significant and often serious disability on the individuals affected and creates major stresses for those who care for or even educate them. Since its first description over 50 years ago, ASD has been the subject of intensive research, and a great deal is now known about how to improve the effects of this disorder. Although, as I keep saying, there is no known cure for ASD or any other, mental health disorders. The ASD guideline addresses identification, assessment, diagnosis, interventions, and services for individuals with ASD. These topics are covered in separate parts of the guideline according to the following structure. Part 1, diagnosis and initial assessment of ASD. Part 2, support for individuals, families, and carers. Part 3, education for learners with ASD. Part 4, treatment and management of ASD. Part 5, living in the community. Part 6, professional learning and development. Part 7, multi-perspectives. Part 8, Pacific People's perspectives. For each of these major areas of the guideline, development team has identified key recommendations for most of these parts. The term ASD is used to refer to a condition that affects communication, social interaction, and adaptive behavior functioning. In the DSM-5, 12 for persuasive developmental disorder subcategory specified in the diagnostic manuals produced. The DSM-5-14 are now subsumed into one broad category of autism spectrum disorder. These subtypes are autistic disorder, Asperger's disorder or Asperger's syndrome, childhood disintegrative disorder, and pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified. The name pervasive developmental disorder has now been changed to autism spectrum disorder. The term used throughout this guideline obviously will be used. For details on diagnostics criteria and changes made under DSM-5, obviously it will be recommended for you to check through into the actual guideline that I'm going to send you the link to under my description. The spectrum of autism disorders is now recognized as covering a wide range of severity and intellectual ability, from the person with severe impairment of classical autism to a high-functioning individual with Asperger's syndrome. Those diagnosed with ASD all display and have in their lifetime displayed 1. Impairment in social communication and social interaction, 2. Restricted repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities. These are all encompassing features which cause clinically significant impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of current functioning, although their intensity may vary from person to person. Part 1. Diagnosis and initial assessment of ASD. In this part of the guideline, basically, this will focus on the diagnosis and initial assessment of children, young people, and adults with ASD. The earlier the diagnosis of ASD is made, however, the greater the impact of the early intervention is needed, and has resulted in fewer challenging behaviours and better outcomes for the families with ASD. The identification of children with ASD usually occurs through parents and their general practitioner, or at a later stage through a child's teachers. It's important to note that primary care professionals monitor developmental milestones at well-child visits to ensure early identification. All healthcare and educational professionals need to be alert to possible signs of ASD and be open to parents' concerns about their children. Concerns about more able children with ASD may not develop into children exposed to the greater social demands of early childhood education or the primary school environment. The guideline provides key signs for identifying ASD in children in separate age bands groups, 1 to 3 years and 4 to 8 years. Diagnosis is also important in young people in their teens and adults, although for some these people diagnosis may only be of academic interest. Others, however, may suffer undue stress, miss out on ineffective treatment options, and receive inappropriate medical, psychiatric, and educational interventions if diagnosis has been missed. Telling a person that they have been diagnosed with ASD should be done sensitively, giving the person enough time to ask questions, to understand what's been said, and to voice concerns. Families and support people may need to be involved when the diagnosis is given, especially when a young person is involved. Assessment is the process of gathering information about the health, education, and care needs of a person with ASD as well as the family. It results in the development of action to plan to meet these needs. ASD, as a key reminder, is a developmental disorder. Its presentation will vary with age and will vary over time with the individual. In New Zealand, there is inconsistent and inequitable access to assessment and diagnosis, however. Young people and adults have no clearly identified pathways for assessment. Multidisciplinary assessment through specialist ASD services is recommended for all people that are suspected of having ASD. The multidisciplinary team approach leads to more robust diagnosis and assessment, more accurate planning of future services and supports, and reduces repetition and redundancy in the assessment and diagnosis process. Professionals providing assessment and diagnosis services for children, young people, and adults with possible ASD also need to consider other possible diagnoses, such as the differential diagnosis. There are, however, assessment tools, checklists, and rating scales that may aid the clinical judgment of the diagnosis. Suggestions for diagnostic tools and the role of cognitive assessment in individuals with ASD are found in, obviously, the diagnosis manual. This deals with the needs of people who share their lives in personal and professional capacities with people with ASD. It also deals with the health support of the people with ASD. The needs of those who share their lives with people with ASD are extensive. ASD is sometimes regarded as a hidden disability that affects every aspect of a person's day-to-day life, including social inclusion. Typically, family are the key people in the lives of the person with ASD. The additional needs for support must be considered to ensure that they too enjoy social inclusion to the degree that other community members take for granted. Provision of information on ASD is seen as crucial by parents and families. It should be available in various formats and take into account the differing needs for these people, both geographic and cultural. Effective educational programs for parents and families lead to improved outcomes both for people with ASD and their carers, families, and whānau. The healthcare needs of a person with ASD can be so complex. Appropriate management of these needs can be aggravated by the symptoms of ASD itself. Specific healthcare needs such as poor dental hygiene, sleep disturbances, gastrointestinal symptoms, sensory impairment, and unpredictable drug reactions underscore the importance of a comprehensive medical assessment for the people with ASD. In New Zealand, the healthcare of children with ASD is usually monitored by, again, a general practitioner, pediatrician, and/or any other child healthcare professionals. Specialist input usually ends up with when the person reaches adulthood. Some adults with ASD avoid visiting health or related services because of anxiety or fear, previous negative experiences, and/or social communication difficulties. Therefore, some people with ASD need support to manage their physical well-being appropriately, and healthcare professionals need knowledge of ASD and how it affects their clients to be able to provide the best healthcare services. Since ASD is a diverse condition with a wide range of impairment, age and diagnosis, intellectual ability, personal needs, and health status, a range of customized support and services will be needed. An individualized approach to service delivery is particularly important, and the need for service coordination is paramount. These challenges need to be addressed. Part 3. Education for learners with ASD. This aims to provide best evidence guidance for professionals who work with children and adolescents with ASD in educational settings. Overall, the evidence is clear that regardless of the intervention, implementation across home, early childhood education, school and community settings is important to the outcomes. Given to the diversity of individuals with ASD, a wide range of support and intervention is always needed. It is, however, unlikely there will ever be a single approach or solution that will meet the needs of all learners with ASD. So models should be chosen to fit the characteristics of the person and learning situation. Most overseas educational intervention programs are based on the 3 broad models: discrete trial training, approaches that draw on recent behavioral and developmental research, and developmental social pragmatic approaches. Some comprehensive programs have used elements of all 3 models, and they each have something to offer in certain situations. However, no one approach has been shown to be more effective than the other. Currently, special education practice in New Zealand emphasizes participation and development rather than treatment or fixing the child. There's good agreement to these best practices for learners with ASD isn't achieved by teaching in isolated settings away from other children. The quality of an intervention is at least as important as its duration. Generalization of learning is crucial and is best achieved by working collaboratively with both teachers and parents. Other characteristics of successful learning programs are also discussed. Section 3.2 of the ASD Guideline looks in detail at several different curriculum areas for children and young people with ASD in their educational setting and how they influence learning. It covers 1. Communication and literary skills, 2. Social development, 3. Sensory motor development, 4. Cognitive development and thinking skills, 5. Self-management skills and addressing challenging behavior. For each of these areas, the ASD Guideline accesses the evidence for effective interventions and implications for professional practice in the classroom. Strategies for supporting young people in secondary school are also discussed. The decision that parents must take about where to place a child with ASD within an educational setting is important, and parents need to be given balanced information about the different options that is available. Members of staff need to have a positive attitude, expertise in ASD, and understanding and willingness to work as a team with the family. Transitions from learners with ASD needs to be carefully planned to minimize any stress. Part 4, Treatment and Management of ASD, covers the management of behavioural, emotional, and mental health difficulties that can be experienced by children, young people, and adults with ASD. Although some of these difficulties can be prevented or minimized by interventions with a totally educational approach, other interventions with a different focus may also be needed. People with ASD are at risk of developing behavioural and emotional difficulty from childhood once problem behaviours have become established. They aren't likely to decrease without intervention and are more likely to worsen than improve. Minimising or avoiding the development of problem behaviours early in life is essential. Long-term difficulties may arise if the communicative, social, and or ritualistic obsessive aspects of ASD aren't addressed. The first step to treatment of behavioural, emotional, and mental health problems is a comprehensive assessment which takes into account the family, whānau, social, and cultural context. Comprehensive treatment plans include components that address behavioural needs, educational interventions, psychosocial treatments, communication, and the suitability or not of medications to provide. The mainstays of treatment are supportive, educational, and behavioural approaches. No medication has been identified as a cure for ASD, and the use of behavioural and environmental strategies for managing challenging behaviours should always be considered before using pharmacotherapy. However, a number of medications may be helpful in significantly improving various target symptoms and associated conditions. There is very limited information on long-term safety, particularly of some of the newer medications, and there are added challenges when the person with ASD has a comorbidity. When prescribing medications, clinicians should consult other appropriate references for comprehensive information of adverse side effects and interactions. Clinicians prescribing these drugs need to keep up to date with the current literature. Even after the use of well-implemented behavioural strategies or medication, a small number of people with ASD will develop serious or dangerous behaviours. For these situations, as discussed, the role of clinical services is also outlined. Part 5, Living in the Community. This identifies the support and transitional needs of people with ASD and their families as they relate to community living. This section focuses mainly on older children, adolescents, and adults with ASD. Transition from high school to further education and or work, paid or unpaid, and from these activities to retirement can cause significant stress and anxiety for the person with ASD. The transition from secondary school into further and post-compulsory education should be carefully planned out with support needs clearly identified. Providers of further education need to have knowledge of the specific educational needs of people with ASD to maximize the opportunity for educational success. Young people and adults with ASD often experience difficulty securing and maintaining work. The work prospects and experiences of people with ASD improve if their ASD characteristics, both as strengths and as support needs, and cognitive ability are considered. Positive work outcomes, example, increased chances of finding work, maintaining work, and have good working relationships for people with ASD, including these with intellectual disabilities, are more likely when best practice supported employment services are involved. These services can help employers to adopt more positive and flexible attitudes towards their employees with ASD. For some people with ASD, further education and or work may not be a goal. For these people, access to meaningful daytime activities and opportunities to participate in recreation and leisure options are also important. Recreation is a powerful tool for promoting independent functioning, community inclusion, and proficiency of the life skills that needs to be addressed. Common barriers to participation for people with ASD include negative community attitude, lack of support, difficulties in communication, and low income. Strategies to promote community participation are discussed, together with the particular difficulties in exploring recreation options experienced by children, adolescents, and adults with ASD. It's commonly believed that people with ASD and other disability have a higher likelihood of contact with the police, courts, and criminal justice system than any other people. but there is little evidence of this. People with disabilities have an increased risk of being victims of crimes, but there's no evidence of an association of people with ASD with criminal behaviour. Given the nature of ASD, young people and adults with ASD are likely to experience difficulties when in contact with the police, courts, and the criminal justice system, and they need particular support to prevent unintentional victimization and undermining of legal and criminal justice processes. The guideline provides advice for the person with ASD when having contact with the police, advice for the family and support persons of young people and adults with ASD having contact with the police and courts, and ASD specific knowledge for police and courts and criminal justice personnel, which obviously still needs to be implemented today. Part 6. Professional learning and development. This discusses the professional learning and developmental needs of the many different individuals who interact with and provide services for people with ASD. Parents, specialists, education, health, and other disability professionals and paraprofessionals who work or live with people with ASD can improve the outcomes for those people if they have the necessary skills developed through education. This education, however, will range from awareness raising to specialized education. Some principles of effective professional learning developments are discussed. It's recommended for professional learning and development in ASD be coordinated nationally, and standards and required competencies be developed. Well, this basically quickly ends, obviously, the part of the guideline.